Welcome to the RIBA, and thank you for the RIBA hosting us tonight for the Milo lecture, which is the Worshipful Company of Chartered Architects annual lecture. 2021, I was listening in December 2021, January 22, I was listening to Professor Russell's Wreath lectures, and I was absolutely captivated and wrote to him the day after they finished to ask him to come and do this lecture sort of 3 years later. The subject was artificial intelligence, and he covered just about every aspect, defense, design, and society. And it seemed like in the dim and distant future that those issues we would be affected by artificial intelligence, but within 6 months it was everywhere. And so I'll be really interested to see in the intervening few years what the current state of the industry is. But the first speaker is Neil Leach, also from California. And Neil has got fantastic examples of architectural imagery and how it's being used in architecture and the industry at the moment. So I thought it would be a great contrast between looking at the regulatory and the possibilities of AI generally, but also focusing first on our own industry to see the possibilities. I know people in our office are doing the most amazing visuals. They look completely unbuildable, some of them, but it is going to be fascinating in the next few years when you think about how technology has changed our industry in the last 20 years, seeing how this particular subject will change it over the forthcoming few years. So Neil, would you like to go first? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here, especially in the presence of someone such as Stuart Russell, who I've admired for some time, despite the fact that he used to be a Portsmouth supporter. And I actually refer to him in my book that was the first book on AI and architecture to come out in English, and it's coming out in a second edition and different languages at the moment. And I also refer to I also get my students to watch his video, Slaughterbots, which I would recommend to anyone. Anyway, to begin with, I'm not going to talk about the technical side of things, but if you are interested in the technical side, we have a platform called Digital Futures, and some of our members are here today, where we have a series of tutorials and discussions about things like copyright and creativity, neuroscience, and whatever. It's actually a fascinating territory. And I also put my Instagram thing where I post my work. But what I'm going to do is just to say a few words of introduction, and these should click through automatically. I'm hoping, yes, they are. This is the kind of thing that I'm sure many of you have been working on, Midjourney, DALL-E, LookX, and so on. And I don't actually think there's anything so special about this. I think that there are much more interesting things about AI, and I think that the future of AI and architecture is going to be completely different. I think it's going to be based on data, automation, optimization, and things I'm going to mention in a moment. But there is something, I think, truly fascinating about what these things can do. But let me maybe just give you some sense of my outlook on AI. I first started working on it, I guess, about 2016, so not as long ago as Stuart. And I was partway through my first book in the summer of 2019, and I wrote to my publishers and I said, listen, I feel compromised about this because I am absolutely amazed by AI, and each day I'm more and more amazed by AI, but each day I would say I'm more and more terrified by AI. So I wrote to them and said, I feel a little compromised. I feel a bit like Elon Musk, who's using AI for Tesla and SpaceX and whatever, and then warning us that AI could be the end of the world. So I managed to persuade them to divide it into two separate books. The one with a white cover that came out in December 2021 about the positive sides of AI, architecture in the age of AI, and one with a black cover about the dark side of AI, the Black Mirror episode of AI. And I'm going to refer a little bit to both of them later on. Now, just to be clear, I don't think there's anything inherently negative about AI at all. It's a question of who uses it and for what. It's a bit like having with a kitchen knife. I can cut up my vegetables with a kitchen knife, and I can also murder someone with a kitchen knife. There's nothing, so far no kitchen knife has been convicted of murder. But nonetheless, I do think there's something so astonishingly potentially capable about AI that I am slightly alarmed and slightly terrified by it. Let me just flick through some of these to get to the next point. So today I'm going to basically divide this up into two separate sections. And these are some of my cars that you can generate as well. I'm going to divide this up essentially into two sections, 10 predictions about the future of architecture in terms of AI, and then a bit of the Black Mirror side, why AI is so scary. But then I'm going to finish off on a very positive note by saying, don't panic. We've got no need to panic. So 10 predictions about the future of architecture. AI will become an indispensable assistant. Well, I think it already is. I mean, I think we're all using it even though we're not aware of it the whole time. Elon Musk makes this comment that we're all cyborgs now. We have a machine extension of ourselves in our phone, our computer, and all our applications. We are already superhuman. People talk about AI in terms of extended intelligence or intelligence augmentation, not necessarily humans versus AI. But recent research conducted by sociologists at Harvard and MIT has shown that actually using AI can make a substantial difference. This is a rather crude graph, but it's part of this research that was conducted. And they looked at three different issues, the quality, the quantity, and the speed at which the outcomes could be achieved. And as you can see from this graph, the blue mountain are those who don't use AI, and the green mountain are those who use AI, and it's something like a 30% difference. It makes a significant difference. It is indispensable now. I don't think we can get away without it, just as we can't get away without spell check or calculators. Design will be driven by data. This is maybe not something we are traditionally thinking about, but I think that one of the key issues is, well, I think data, automation, optimization are going to be the key issues in architectural practice. And it comes largely out of this particular practice, OMA, Rem Koolhaas, not the practice that you think would associate with technology. And that's precisely the reason why it happened. One of the leading figures, who happens to be one of my doctoral candidates, is Wan Yu He. She studied at the Berlage and then went to work with Rem first in Rotterdam and then in Hong Kong. And she was continually frustrated by the inefficiencies of the office. They were working in Lang Kwai Fong in the nightclub district of Hong Kong. Everyone was having fun, and they were working till 2 at night and all weekends. And she decided she had to do something about it. So she set up a company called X-Cool. And X-Cool basically means X-Koolhaas. And this is back in 2016 when China was starting to wake up to AI, and this is one of the early research she was doing. Since then, she's also launched a diffusion model that's trained on architectural images and text. And just as OMA flipped into AMO, she took the term X-Cool, and LookX is the one that's the new diffusion model. I can't show you what they're producing right now because it's all under wraps, and I've seen it, but I can't show you it. But let me just simply say, by way of analogy, what's happening right now in the world of shipping is that they're beginning to sort of take some of the technologies they were using at the very cutting edge of America's Cup, where they were using AI, and they're applying it to commercial shipping, and they're having an effect of reducing the carbon footprint of ships by up to 20 to 30%, which is quite significant. And what they do, they don't sketch anything. They don't draw. It's all generated by data. And I think that's the way, largely, that architecture will be going in the future. So automation is going to be the key aspect of all this. What's going to happen is, and not only... well, I would say something. I think that X-Cool is going to be the leading company, I suspect, but they're in competition with Autodesk. And the problem with Autodesk, it's a large corporate company that's very slow to change in a world which is rapidly changing. They're beholden to their shareholders, whereas I think X-Cool are much quicker to adapt and things. But anyway, both of them are looking to having a kind of platform that is going from data to fabrication in the end. At the moment, if you're working in an office, you might start with Midjourney, then you might go to Maya and Rhino, and then BIM. It's all going to be on a single platform, and it's all going to be conforming to all the constraints, planning constraints, building regulations, and so on, with the cost written into it, and also structural, acoustic, and environmental calculations written into it. So we're going to have a singular platform that is going to be extraordinarily comprehensive. And Autodesk are looking to actually take it beyond the construction of the building to the monitoring of the building, the performance itself. The fabrication is less obvious in terms of AI, but the way they're talking about it is to try and develop these kind of data-rich environments whereby the components are seen a bit like Lego blocks, but extremely advanced, high-tech, modular, prefabricated Lego blocks that are going to be put together, and the whole process digitally controlled. AI will be optimizing all designs. That, I think, is fairly clear. Some of the surrogate models that we already have, this is infrared, developed by the Austrian Institute of Technology, are looking at environmental questions and trying to find ways in which you can improve our layouts. Rather crude in a way, but giving a general impression about what you can do. There's also a company, and many companies, in fact, working on structural optimization software. Not exactly cutting-edge AI in terms of its techniques, but still looking at how we can generate optimized forms using these processes. This is the work of Mike Shee, who has a company called Amoeba. He's based in RMIT in Australia. And this, I think, was an interesting project in terms of, just historically, this was a competition that an ex-Cool went into against 200 other architects in China. And they won it. And it was a project that was completely based on automation and optimization. And if you look at this, this is the wind current that's been used to model, or rather to erode, shall we say, the rectilinear forms until eventually we have a kind of form that comes out that is completely different. It is much more, let's say, Frank Gehry-like, more organic in terms of its form, and it's conforming to all these constraints. They also used AI to look at the paneling system on it. They initially had 1,000 different panels, then they reduced it down to 100 by consulting with someone from Gehry Technologies, then they used AI and reduced it down to 12. Now, that has now been constructed, and I think this is a historical moment. Just last week it was constructed, the first ever AI-generated building to be constructed. Buildings will become intelligent. I think this, in some sense, is fairly obvious through the use of the digital twin. Digital twin has been used in many different ways. For me, it's not just a digital model. It's a digital model that has real-time feedback from the actual real world, as it were, and uses AI to optimize things. It's been used for motors, it's been used for cars, and increasingly, it's being used for buildings. And if you want to look at a kind of the building of the future, this surprisingly conventional building is probably that. This is the Center for Environmental Research run by Ali Malkawi at Harvard GSD, and this is a building that's been retrofitted with a whole series of sensors, and it has a digital twin brain, as it were, that is optimizing its performance. Cities will become intelligent. What will the city of the future look like? Will it look like something out of the Jetsons, a kind of science fiction world of the future? Or will it look pretty much like the cities of today, with a few new buildings in there, but largely the same, with all the existing buildings retrofitted like that building with these new technologies and with the infrastructure itself controlled by AI? My bet is it is going to look like this. This is Los Angeles, where I'm based, and I don't think the city of the future is going to look that much different to the city of today. Back in 2009, I published an issue of AD on digital cities, and all the architects, starting from Patrick Schumacher onwards, gave their vision of the future. And in Patrick's case, it was the parametric city. In fact, this was the first ever article he wrote about parametricism. But we haven't seen anything such thing as a parametric city. There hasn't been built. And the most interesting article in that particular edition was the final article by a philosopher of technology called Ben Bratton, who said, the article was called iPhone City, and he said that the iPhones changed the way in which we navigate and use our cities more than any architect or building has. And I think he's completely right. In other words, the city of the future is going to be controlled by information, not by new sexy forms. Mario Carpo was always asking this question: what will be the architecture, the style of this new information age? And I don't think it's going to look any different to our age now. The one way to think about this is to look at an Uber car. Does an Uber car look any different to an ordinary car? No, because it is an ordinary car. It just operates in a different way. The way it handles its information is radically different. So what's going to happen, I think, is they're going to be using AI increasingly to look at the questions such as traffic. In fact, in China, CityBuild already has quite an extensive network of these where they claim to be able to reduce traffic problems considerably and to be able to recognize accidents as soon as they've happened. Cities learn to think. Well, I'm not sure that cities can think, but never mind. Clients will expect their architects to use AI. I wrote about this in my book, and it seems to be increasingly the case that clients are expecting their architects to use AI in order to maximize their return on investment, to guarantee the results, and so on and so on and so on. So I don't think that's anything so surprising. But what's been happening is there's a slightly dark side of that, in the sense that some clients are asking their architects, are you using AI? And they say yes. And they say, well, in that case, I'm not going to pay you so much. So I think fees are going to become an issue, particularly as AI creeps in more and more to the operations in the office. Economics will be the main driver of change. This is not my idea. It's the idea of the Suskins, who wrote this book, The Future of the Professions, predicting that most of the professions would probably collapse fairly soon, and it all be the key driver of change is going to be economics. The client is going to be looking for savings all over the place, and for the architect, the key question then, especially when AI is there, is how to establish value. This is a question I know that Gensler is looking at. I've got one of my doctoral candidates is working for Gensler and looking at this issue for them of how you establish your value in this changing marketplace. Now, there is one category of architect I think is going to escape all this. I think that it's going to be increasingly competitive. It's going to be increasingly difficult. But I think that the star architects are going to be okay. I mean, I always thought that Zaha was a bit like a Prada bag or a Gucci bag. And the point about when you buy a Prada bag or a Gucci bag is you're not trying to save money. You're trying to do the opposite. You're trying to show it's a kind of conspicuous show of wealth. You're trying to show that you don't care about money. So I think that the star architects will be fine in an increasingly challenging marketplace. The architectural profession will be disrupted. Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. For a series of different reasons. I mean, we made a couple of mistakes, I think, in the past. First of all, we assumed that it would be the blue-collar workers who would be struggling, the factory workers. We've all seen these kind of Tesla factories without a single worker on the floor, and we assumed that they would be the ones that would be out of a job, and the white-collar workers, the architects, the engineers, the lawyers, the computer scientists, and so on, would be okay. But what's really happening is that robotics is, on the whole, still struggling to develop. Meanwhile, AI has been racing ahead to the point that it's now able to write code, and even computer scientists are a threat. The problem about robotics is that the robots, well, in a very controlled environment, are fine, but put them in an uncontrolled environment, they will struggle. There's something called Morovich's paradox that basically says that we do things things that are easy for us are difficult for computers, and things that are easy for computers are difficult for us. So, for example, we can catch a ball, but that's very difficult for a robot. And if you were to say to put a bunch of Lego bricks on the table there and get a robotic arm to stack them, it would have the motility of about a one-year-old kid. It would still struggle to do that. So what's happening right now in Amazon packaging factories is actually they're using humans to stack things. They actually have robotic vehicles that bring the materials to the worker, and the worker stacks them, because that's what we can do at the moment. But so in fact it's the white-collar workers who are actually at threat. Now, the second mistake we make is this. You've probably seen this all over the place. AI won't replace humans. It won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace those without AI. I mean, everywhere I see this, including the Harvard Business Review. This is so misleading. It's so misleading because it assumes there's a one-for-one correlation, that one person using AI will replace one person not using AI. But if we look at this graph again, and the same graph applies both for quantity and for speed, you can see that there's a significant difference between the blue mountain and the green mountain. In other words, you can not only improve the quality, but also the quantity and the speed by a significant amount. That means that what we're talking about is not one for one, but something more like this. AI won't replace humans, but 3 humans with AI will replace 5 humans without AI. It's difficult to say in general for a profession like architecture. You have to do it task by task, but it's clear that this is really what we're talking about, and AI will affect jobs. One example of how this might happen is I've got a colleague in LA called Guvench Ozil. He teaches at UCLA. He uses AI, and he's got a small 4-person practice. They keep winning all these big projects, Stadia and so on, against the big firms. And that's fine. I mean, they're doing very well, but the real problem comes when push comes to shove, and when it gets a little bit competitive. What's going to happen? Well, if you've got a 4-person practice, you can probably lower your fees to remain competitive. But the problem about that is that the money coming into the profession is largely based on a percentage of the cost of the building. There will be no more buildings because buildings are expensive. And if you were to say lower fees from, let's say, 5% as a ballpark figure down to 2% because you're remaining competitive, that's going to have an effect on the amount of cash coming into the profession, and it's going to lower it by 40%. That will have a huge impact on the profession of architecture, and we run the risk of doing that's happening in China right now, where fees have gone down for other reasons, so low that no student wants to study architecture. They're all doing design instead. The cultural capital of architecture itself might go down. AI will be able to design a building completely autonomously. I think eventually it probably will. That'll be amazing, fantastic. It'll be so easy to generate a building, it'll be incredible. But there's a dark side to that. Once you've got a self-driving car that doesn't need a driver, once you've got an autonomous system that can design buildings without human intervention, then perhaps we don't need so many architects. So my message basically is what we need to design right now is not another building, but the very future of the profession. What is the answer? I don't know exactly, but it's important to be aware of the question. So I want to move on to the Black Mirror side a little bit, just briefly. Why is AI so scary? Well, I'm interested, and I don't know about Stuart, but I'm interested in these things, large language models, which I think, despite the rather unassuming name, are actually very interesting. And they're not large, they're gigantic. They're trained on trillions of bits of information and billions of parameters. They are massive pre-trained models. This is the GPT behind ChatGPT. Now, what is interesting about these things is that the code is apparently relatively simple. But the bigger the data on which they are trained, the more they're displaying what they call emergent capabilities. They're beginning to learn to write code. They're beginning to learn to translate languages, things they were never taught to do. And that is a little bit alarming in some senses. Stuart has been part of this movement to try and to slow things down. The Future of Life organization, I think Max Tegmark launched this, issued a letter calling for people to slow down in these large language models. This is the letter itself. We call on all AI labs to immediately pause for at least 6 months the training of all systems more powerful than GPT-4. And interesting, there's a reference down here to the bottom here, merely stepping back from the dangerous race to ever larger, unpredictable black box models with emergent capabilities. And these I find fascinating, these emergent capabilities. Yuval Harari is worried that they've now hacked the operating system of human beings because they've learned to write. And once you can write, you have amazing abilities. I would argue they've also hacked the operating system of architects in that they've learnt to design. Those of you who've used Midjourney will know that you use prompts. My particular prompts are quite long. They're like 70 to 80 words. And I refer to lots of things. I talk about the lighting conditions. I talk about the hyper-realistic details. I talk about the rendering and so on and so on and so on. All this there. But the only reference to architecture in a 70 to 80 word prompt is, in this case, it was ultra-contemporary minimalist villa in the Austrian Alps. I didn't specify what the Alps looked like or this valley. I didn't say what that boulder was or this grass was. I didn't even give any information about what the shape of the building was or the materials. Midjourney did all that. In other words, even though it often gets it wrong, it can get it right. And when it gets it right, it can be quite spectacular. Or take this example. This is a stainless steel kitchen. I didn't ask it to put this painting in the background. It's kind of nice painting. I didn't ask it to put that bush there or these things outside or the coffee maker or whatever. Midjourney did it. Midjourney designed that kitchen. Or this. I don't know how long it takes an architect to render this, but Midjourney did this in 3 seconds. That's pretty astonishing. Well, if you think that's astonishing, I think this is a little bit more unnerving. This is Sora, which has been produced by OpenAI. It's not been launched yet. They've given us a few samples to look at, and what it seems to be capable of doing is maintaining a certain consistency to up to 60 seconds. And when you see the detail, it gets some extremely good close-up detail. Now, we've had text-to-video since 2022, but nothing of the quality of this. And this is truly, truly astonishing. So just in a second, we'll get a close-up of the face, and you can see how astonishing this is. It's due to be released in September or October. And this works by a similar kind of way to similar to the large language model, in the sense that they use, instead of tokens for words, they use patches for videos, but they are trained on massive amounts of data, and they also start developing these emergent capabilities. For example, one of the things that's quite difficult to do, and I'm sure Stuart knows more about this than I do, is to deal with occlusion. Occlusion is when something disappears out the frame and comes back into the frame again. And what you see in this kind of suburban train ride through Tokyo, I guess it is that suddenly this view disappears from sight, like now, and then comes back in again. And that it's not been trained for that at all. What I find even more unnerving is the way in which it's able to deal with 3D. This is a guinea fowl from Papua New Guinea, and you can see the detail is astonishing, but when it moves its head, you can suddenly realize its grasp of 3D seems to be extraordinary. So in a moment, you'll just see it move its head, and that is truly amazing to me. It has, you can use it for 3D rigging, you can put an avatar on it and so on, but I was talking about this I'm at the end of a long lecture tour, and I was talking about somewhere, I won't say where, and one of the professors in the school has been testing out Sora. And I said, well, tell me more about it. He said, I can't tell you a thing. I can't tell you a thing. And I said, well, okay, instead of using the word is, why don't we use the word would be or might be or something? And he was able to convey that they're getting very, very close to 3D. They might be getting very close to 3D because they're using kind of photogrammetry, and the amount of data is allowing a much greater resolution to the form that they're getting. And of course, architects will say, well, yes, fine, birds and whatever, but they can't do architecture. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. This is Sora, and I have no idea what the prompt was, but this is text to video, and this is interior design. And we had a discussion between Patrick Schumacher and Wan Yu He on digital futures, and Patrick was saying, no, humans have got to be able to do this. The metaverse, you've got to be human to do this. And Wan Yu said, no, AI is going to be able to do it. And from the evidence of this, I think it is. So that seems to me quite serious. I want to just go and turn to Geoffrey Hinton, who's also British. I don't know whether, I mean, sometimes Stuart is a bit of a doomer, sometimes not. I think maybe something from being brought up with Coronation Street and EastEnders makes you kind of like slightly pessimistic about things in life. But anyway, what I find interesting about Geoffrey Hinton, who actually, incidentally, he studied architecture for 2 days at the University of Cambridge before he decided that architecture was not for him. One of my colleagues at Foster & Partners said, he's smart. It took me 5 years to decide it wasn't for me. But he went to natural sciences, and eventually he did a PhD at Edinburgh, and he got into AI almost by default because he was working on the mind, on neuroscience. And so I find him interesting because unlike people like Ray Kurzweil, who come up with generalizations about intelligence versus AI, I mean, he's breaking it down into certain cognitive skills. Now, we know, for example, that ChatGPT knows 10,000 times more than anyone in this room, including Stuart, but knowing something is not the same as understanding. And understanding is not the same as thinking, and thinking is not the same as reasoning. There are different steps in this process. So I'm just going to play you Geoffrey Hinton and why he's so concerned about this. He stepped out of Google in order to go and voice his concerns about this new technology.
It made me realise that these digital intelligences have something we don't have that makes them much better. When one of them knows something, it can tell all the others. That's what we don't have with people. So imagine you had 10,000 people, and imagine if when one person learned something, everybody knew it. You could learn a lot more stuff, right?
Right.
And that's why things like ChatGPT knows like 10,000 times as much as any one person. It's because when you train it, there's lots of different copies looking at different bits of the data and learning stuff, and they can all combine what they learn instantly with a bandwidth of like trillions of bits.
So can they think?
Yes. So imagine the following scenario. I'm talking to chatbot, and we talk for a bit, and the answers it's given me seem a bit strange to me, and I suddenly realise that it thinks I'm a teenage girl. And I say, what demographic do you think I am? And it says it thinks I'm a teenage girl. So the question is, when I said I suddenly realised it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was that a metaphorical use of the word think, or was that just the same way as we use think? And I strongly believe that use of the word think, when I said it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was exactly the same way of using think as we do with people.
And so that was enough to make you say, what, this has accelerated beyond my comfort level?
I suddenly realised maybe they already are better, and making them more like real neural nets isn't the point. They're already better than us. They're a better way of doing learning. And if we make them bigger, they'll get much smarter than us. They already know more than any one person.
I understand that things could go awry, but I still think that people hear the notion of danger and they dismiss it as hyperbole.
I thought it was hyperbole for a long time because I thought these things were a long way off. I thought there will eventually be danger, but I thought focusing on it now is unnecessary because it'll be 30 to 50 years before these things get more intelligent than us. But this combination of realizing that they might have a much better way of learning than we have, because they can share knowledge instantly, and seeing things like ChatGPT or Palm at Google that can explain why a joke is funny, made me realize these things are already pretty intelligent, and if they've got a better form of intelligence than ours, then it gets to be much more urgent.
So just to kind of clarify, the reference to a joke, he asked Palm to explain a joke, and it did it very effectively, and thereby he figured that if it explains a joke, it must understand a joke. And there are several others in the field, including people like Blazer Guriakos, who claim that really ChatGPT and Palm do understand things when they give an answer. The basic view, which he doesn't necessarily convey here, is that AI has got a completely different form of intelligence. It's a mechanical intelligence, and not a biological intelligence, but nonetheless, it is potentially far superior to human intelligence. This idea of the fact that you can share knowledge with 1,000 others computers is kind of interesting. Up till now, we tend to have used kind of Moore's law as a way of explaining exponential growth in the field. Gordon Moore was an industrialist who pointed out that every 18 months the number of transistors on a circuit board would double and the price would come down by half. In other words, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, we went 1, 2, 4, 8. Well, now we've got like 1 to 1,000. It's a bit like the R number during COVID, which if it was less than 1, it wasn't spreading. If it was more than 1, it was spreading. Well, what happens when the R number is 1,000? Well, anyway, if you're not terrified by that, this is Yuval Harari telling us it's the end of history.
This is the end of human history, the end of human-dominated history. History will continue with somebody else in control. In 5 years, there'll be a technology that can make decisions independently and that can create new ideas independently. Maybe they'll be nice. Maybe they'll solve cancer and climate change, but we are not sure. I'm tending to think of it more in terms of really an alien invasion, an alien fleet of spaceships coming from planet Zircon or whatever with highly intelligent beings. This is what we are facing, except that the aliens are not coming in spaceships from planet Zircon, they're coming from the laboratory. If the humans are divided among themselves and are in an arms race, then it becomes almost impossible to contain this alien intelligence.
I like this because I use the term alien intelligence in my book, and to my mind, it prevents us from anthropomorphizing AI. It's not the same as that. And I disagree with Jeffrey Hinton in the sense that I don't think it can think. It can do things, but I put it in inverted commas. Think, intelligence, and I think learning have to be in inverted commas. But it is a very radically different form of intelligence. To that extent, I think our problem has been that we've been looking at AI from an anthropocentric point of view and saying, well, it's not conscious, it's not sentient, it's not self-aware, it's nowhere near as good as us. And yet if ChatGPT knows 10,000 times more information than us, what would AI think if it could think about us? It would probably think us impossibly slow and impossibly stupid. I gave a talk last year in Warsaw. Nicholas Copernicus was from Poland, and he, of course, told us the fact that his whole notion of the Copernican revolution was to say that the Earth is not the center of the universe, rather the Earth revolves around the sun. I think we've got to begin to realize that we are no longer the center of intelligence in the universe. There is potentially another form of intelligence that is potentially much better than ours. However, don't panic. Or indeed, on the back cover of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. I want to say that even though things are going to be very, very different in the future, and in some senses much better, in some senses much worse, I don't know, I would say, but we shouldn't panic. I want to just play you Arthur C. Clarke. Now, this is astonishing. This was 60 years ago, this was filmed, in 1964. It's almost as though it was being filmed at the same time as Geoffrey Hinton was talking. Let's just hear what Arthur C. Clarke has got to say.
However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we are now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter.
What I think is going to save us is this, that human beings, one of our strongest abilities is to adapt. We are infinitely adaptive creatures. Neuroscientists talk about how the brain is plastic. But when you think about it, we can't even remember what it was like before we had these mobile phones. But there was a time, and it wasn't so long ago. We've almost completely forgotten about the age of the fax machine. And it's that capacity to adapt to new conditions that is going to save us. The world is going to be fundamentally different. There is not going to be so much work for architects. I'm convinced of that. There'll be huge advances in other areas, I'm sure, in medicine and science, and it'll be compensated for, but it'll not be the same. But we will adapt to our new normal. Just to give you one example of what I'm talking about. If 50 years ago, someone had said to me, in 50 years' time, most marriages would end in divorce, I would throw up my hands in horror and say, my God, the world's coming to an end, what's happening? But 50% of marriages, or more than 50% of marriages, do end in divorce these days, and we're quite okay with it. We've adjusted to the new normal. So I'm quite convinced that we shouldn't panic. So I'm going to finish on a very British note. Keep calm and carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take questions at the end. I'd just like to hear from Professor Stuart Russell if he thinks the future is as scary. It's exciting, but it's scary at the same time. Please.
Good question. Well, I disagree with almost nothing that Neil said. So, okay. Except maybe the last slide. I don't share Arthur C. Clarke's view that it's perfectly okay to replace us with machines. I think there is value in human existence. I I'm not sure that we'll ever know that there's any value in machine existence. And that's what matters.
But you're going to explain the effect, the regulatory, and more how this imagery and this technology is going to be implemented, really, or may be implemented.
Yeah, I'll talk about
Okay, thank you.
all of those things and a few more.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Okay, so with that introduction, that will save me a lot of time, because I think there's quite a lot in common between our presentations. So I want to, first of all, get across this basic idea about what we mean by artificial intelligence. And what we've meant since pretty much the beginning of the field. We had a slight detour into trying to build models of human intelligence, and that ended up branching off into cognitive science. But for most of the history of the field, we have this standard model, which was borrowed from philosophers and economists, work that they had done over centuries to come up with the idea of rational behavior. And in a non-technical sentence, a machine is intelligent to the extent that its actions can be expected to achieve its objectives. And this is what we have been building on. It's the same notion, actually, that underlies other disciplines. Neil mentioned optimization, but we see it in control theory, in operations research, in economics, in statistics. In all these areas, we define objectives, we create machinery that achieves those objectives, and then off it goes. AI is different from those other disciplines because we have a pretty ambitious goal, that we want systems that can quickly learn high-quality behavior in any task environment. So they would exceed human capabilities in every dimension that matters. And that's been a very clear and explicit goal since the 1950s. So here's an interesting question. Have we actually succeeded in achieving that goal? And 5 years ago, no one would even bother asking that question because it was obvious that the systems we had were lacking in so many ways. But now, people are writing about this in the sense of saying, actually, we have succeeded. So Peter Norvig, who's co-author on my textbook, recently wrote an article saying that we have succeeded in creating general-purpose AI of the kind that I just described. And he draws an analogy to aeroplanes, that when the Wright brothers made a petrol-powered, winged, pilotable, self-powered airplane, they had basically solved the problem of flight. And everything that happened after that was basically making it bigger, making the engines more powerful, making the seats more comfortable, and adding drink service. But the problem was basically solved by the early 1900s. I disagree, actually, quite profoundly with that, for reasons that I'll explain in a minute. I do think that the systems that we have seen since November of 2022, with ChatGPT, Llama, Gemini, and so on, I think those are a piece of the puzzle, but they do not constitute general-purpose AI. And the problem is that we don't actually know what we've done. We don't know how these systems work. We don't know why they don't work sometimes. And so we don't know how to take the next step because we haven't done any of the science. Right? It's the best analogy I can come up with is 5,000 years ago when someone accidentally left some fruit out in a bowl for a few weeks and then came back and ate it or drank it and got completely drunk. That was really amazing, right? And they thought, wow, this is the coolest technology ever. But they didn't really know how it worked. All they knew is you did this and then you get really drunk. And that's the sort of situation we're in now. You create a network that looks like this, right? Except, so if you took that network and I'm not showing all of it, right? On this scale, ChatGPT would be about as big as the entire surface inside the M25. So imagine taking that sort of chain link fence and it covers the entire area inside the M25. That's about how big these systems are. So we take that network and we tweak the connection strengths of all of those links so that the output of the circuit looks more like what the training data says it's supposed to be. And that's it. So it's a completely simple method. We are optimizing the objective being replicate what you see in the training data by stochastic gradient descent, making small random changes to the connection strengths. We do about a quintillion small random changes to the connection strengths, and we hope for the best. And then we let it loose and see what it does. And we have absolutely no idea what's going on inside. We're starting to get a few clues, right? Little places where we can detect things that we recognize and understand. But the fundamental principles of what's going on are anyone's guess. So this is not the only way to build AI systems. This happens to be the approach that's popular right now. Here's another approach from 1958. Some of you may recognize this. This is Fortran programs. So we filled the box with Fortran programs, and then we made lots of small random changes, except instead of making small random changes in the connection strengths of a network, we make small random changes in the code itself. And then we also do evolutionary operations, so crossover. You take two Fortran programs and you mix them together, just like as happens in evolution. So this was tried in the 1950s. Friedberg was the main author of this approach. It didn't get very far. But it was using a million times less computation than we use today in even relatively minor training runs for large language models. So we actually don't know what would happen if we tried this again today, and perhaps someone might like to do that. But for most of the history of the field, we actually took what may seem to be a very common sense approach, which is that we're intelligent because we know things and we reason with that knowledge and we make plans with that knowledge, and then we use those plans to do things. And so this is the main approach that we followed in AI from the 1950s onwards. The knowledge-based approach. The initial technology starting around 1960 was that the knowledge was expressed in mathematical logic and the reasoning processes were logical reasoning processes. By the 1990s, we generalized that to accommodate uncertainty, particularly uncertain data coming from sensors and uncertainty in our ability to predict the future using probability theory. And we now have very, very powerful technologies for representing probabilistic knowledge and reasoning with that knowledge to make decisions. I actually think that in the long run, this approach is going to make a comeback, possibly in some kind of hybrid with the deep network technologies that I mentioned before. And let me give you an example of why I think the knowledge-based approach is actually much more powerful. And this is an example of human intelligence. So here is a sort of cartoon of two black holes circling around each other about 1.2 billion years ago, about 1.2 billion light years away. Those black holes, as they circle around each other, they get closer and closer, and they emit energy in the form of gravitational waves. And at the closest approach before they collide, so they're about 300 meters apart, and each of them weighs 25 to 30 times as much as the sun. And they're rotating around each other several hundred times per second. It's impossible for us to imagine a physical system like that. The amount of energy being emitted in the form of gravitational waves is 50 times larger than the output of all the stars in the universe. So those gravitational waves then travel at the speed of light, and they arrive on Earth 1.2 billion years later, and we just happen a couple of days before to have turned on the Large Interferometric Gravitational Observatory. And there are two of these. Each of those arms is several kilometers long and is filled with all kinds of physics. So there are lasers, there are computing devices, there are incredible mirrors and other sensing equipment. And they can measure changes in length, so distortions in space itself, in 21 decimal places. So if Alpha Centauri moved away from the Earth by the width of a human hair, this device would be able to measure that it was now further away than it was before. So incredible achievement, and it's absolutely clear that this is the result of a knowledge-based system. Science itself is a knowledge-based system because most of the input, the sensory inputs of the scientists that went to produce everything we know about science are long gone, and the scientists are dead. And science operated as a knowledge-based system by accumulating knowledge and transmitting it in written form, in equations, mathematical equations, and text. And the human beings learn that, and then they reason with it to produce this kind of device. And they were able to predict exactly what the waveform would look like, what the distortion of space would look like if gravitational waves arrived from a collision of two black holes, and they were able to measure the masses of those black holes from looking at the waveform. So this is a quite incredible achievement, and there's absolutely no way that GPT-4 or GPT-5 could do this. It doesn't even begin to approach this kind of capability. So one might ask, well, why not, right? What's wrong with it, right? Doesn't deep learning solve everything? And this is what the companies will tell you. And it does do, as Neil showed, some quite amazing things with images, with sound, with video, and so on. But these systems actually are unable to learn some very simple concepts. So everyone has probably read that despite having read 10,000 or maybe 100,000 times more than any human being, and despite having seen millions of examples of addition and multiplication, and despite having been told thousands of times how to do it, ChatGPT still cannot add and multiply correctly. So why is that? Well, it's because it's a circuit. And circuits are not very good at expressing certain kinds of concepts. And addition and multiplication of long numbers is one of those things that is very easy to write down in English. You can say, well, you add up the rightmost column, and then you carry whatever's left over, and you put that in the next column. You keep doing that, right? You can write that in 2 lines of Python, but as a circuit, it's quite complicated because you have to replicate that circuit for every column for numbers of arbitrary length, and that whole large circuit then has to be learned by the algorithm, and it just doesn't seem to be able to do that. And even worse with multiplication, and even worse with things like checkmate. Right? Think about the definition of checkmate in chess. Right? It's easy to write down in 1 sentence of English. It's easy to write down in mathematical logic. It's easy to write down in Python. But a circuit is a terrible representation for concepts like that. You can't tell the system, well, it doesn't really matter where it is on the board. You have to say, well, if the king is here and the other pieces are there, and then, well, if the king is there and the other piece is there, and if the king is there and the other pieces are there, right? So you've got to replicate that definition of checkmate for every place the king could be, and for every place the other pieces could be, and all the rest of that. So you end up with something that instead of being a few lines is possibly 100,000 pages. And that means that the amount of data the system needs to learn those concepts is enormous, and they still don't learn the correct version of the concepts. So I'm actually going to illustrate that for the game of Go. Right, so as many of you know, AlphaGo defeated the human world champion in 2017, and that was often called now China's Sputnik moment. So that's where China, because Go is considered to be the pinnacle of human intellectual achievement, if you could beat the human world champion at Go, then obviously AI is going to be the technology of the future, and the Chinese government decided that they needed to win that technology race. They announced a $150 billion investment plan for R&D in AI. So since 2017, the AI systems have vastly exceeded human capabilities. Just to give you a sense of that, the human world champion's rating is about 3,800. The best Go program now has a rating of 5,200. So that means if it played the human world champion, you would expect it to win somewhere between 99 and 100 times out of 100. So massively superhuman. And we're going to play a game between the current best program, whose name is JBX Kata 005, but sometimes just called KataGo, and one of our grad students who collaborates with our group. Kellen is actually a student at Montreal, but has been working with our group on this project. And just to make it even more ridiculously impossible for Kellen to win, we're going to give a 9-stone handicap to Black, to the computer. Okay, so if you don't play Go, I'll explain the rules of Go to you very briefly. You put stones on the board. You take turns putting white and black stones on, and you try to surround territory, and you also try to surround your opponent's pieces. If you completely surround your opponent's pieces, so they have no breathing spaces at all, then those pieces are captured and removed from the board, and then you have that territory. So that's pretty much it. So giving KataGo a 9-stone handicap, right? I mean, he already looks like he owns most of the board. This is the kind of start that you give to a 5-year-old when you're teaching them to play. So this is an incredible insult to KataGo. May not ever recover from this loss of face. Okay, so let's watch the game. And so remember that the computer is black and Kellen is playing white. And watch what happens in the bottom right quarter of the board. So here Kellen starts to make a little group, and then Black quickly surrounds that group to stop it from growing and spreading across the board. And then what happens is that Kellen starts to surround that black group. So we're making a kind of circular sandwich here, or you could think of it as a Scotch egg. And black doesn't seem to notice. It doesn't get it. It doesn't understand that its pieces are going to be captured. So it doesn't do anything about it. It has many opportunities to prevent that from happening, but just leaves white to capture all those pieces and loses the game. So Kellen, despite being, is a good amateur player, nowhere near professional standard, has beaten not only Katago dozens of times in a row with a 9-stone handicap, but also all the other leading Go programs. They all are unable to cope with this pretty basic thing, which even a very normal human player would spot it immediately and solve the problem and get out of that situation. But the Go programs, despite being massively superhuman, fail completely. And we believe this is because they have not learned correctly the concept of a group of stones. And they don't recognize that this circular thing is still a group of stones, and so they don't understand what's going on at all. So, I won't actually go into other branches of AI technology, but there are other branches of AI technology that don't suffer from the same weaknesses. And as I said, I believe that the pendulum is probably going to swing back, where we find out how to take advantage of those other technological approaches, combine that with what's been happening in deep learning, and then resume the kind of progress, the rapid knocking over of one problem after another that we've been seeing for the last few years. So I do believe that we will succeed, and Neil mentioned 30 to 50 years. I think it was Jeff Hinton saying 30 to 50 years was what he used to think. I think it will be considerably shorter than that. So what if we do succeed? Well, if we look on the bright side, right, if you have general purpose AI, then you can use it to do what we already know how to do, except at much less cost and on a much greater scale. And we already know how to deliver a civilization that provides a nice, comfortable standard of living for some fraction of the people on Earth, some fraction of people in Britain, some fraction of people in Switzerland and Norway and the United States and so on. But the vast majority of people on Earth don't get to enjoy that. But we could deliver that standard of living to everyone. And if you calculate what that increased standard of living is worth in terms of its net present value, so what's the cash equivalent of having that increased income stream, it's about $15 quadrillion. Right? So that's a lower bound on the cash value of general purpose AI as a technology. And obviously it's a lower bound because there's probably tons more things we could do besides just replicate Tunbridge Wells across the whole Earth. Right? So we could have much better healthcare, much better education, more rapid advances in science, some of which we're already seeing. So then, there's a question which Neil also raised of, what are people going to do? And, how do we avoid the Wall-E world where, because people don't need to understand their own civilization, because the AI systems are doing everything for them, they no longer know how to run their own civilization. They no longer have the incentive to learn. Right? We break that chain of communicating our knowledge to the next generation, which has been going on since before there were human beings. Right? We have plenty of evidence of pre-human technologies being passed on for well over 1 million years. the technology of fire, the technology of working with stone. These were pre-human technologies, and they were passed on for over 1 million years, so tens of thousands of generations. And now we're going to break that chain, which may be irreversible. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about something that Alan Turing said. So Alan Turing is now on a 50-pound note, so some of you may be able to afford one and know what he looks like. Yeah, when I gave the Reith lectures, I asked the BBC if they could give me a 50-pound note to show it, and they said, "Oh, sorry, we can't give you one of those." So I had to print one out myself. Anyway, so Alan Turing, was the founder of computer science, and in many ways the founder of AI as well. And in a lecture in 1951, he basically said the same thing as Geoff Hinton, right? It seems probable that once the machine thinking method had started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. And if you just think about this from the point of view of the gorillas, right? So imagine that, the gorillas are having their annual Milo lecture a few million years ago, and one of the gorillas is saying, okay, there are these humans, we're expecting them to come along fairly soon. They're scrawny, and they seem to be missing most of their fur, and, we don't expect much to worry about from these humans, right? And some other gorilla says, oh, no, they're going to be much more intelligent than us, and our future will come to an end, right? The time of guerrilla control will end, and these humans will take over. We don't understand how, but this is going to happen, right? And that gorilla would be right. They didn't understand what happened to them, but they no longer have control over their own future. So I've been worrying about this I've been doing AI for 48 years, and I've been thinking about this question for just over 10 years. In 2015, I gave a talk at a meeting in Puerto Rico, and I tried to illustrate my frustration, right? Why is no one paying attention to this problem? So I imagined what would happen if a superior alien civilization sent email to the human race saying, we're going to arrive in 30 to 50 years' time. And what does the human race do? They say, humanity is currently out of the office. We'll respond to your message when we return, with a smiley face just to rub it in, right? This is how it felt in 2015, that no one was paying attention, and yet the vast majority of AI researchers were quite sure that superhuman AI would be coming along in this kind of time frame, 30 to 50 years. And then it sort of happened, right? In 2023, we'd already been softened up by ChatGPT, but then GPT-4 came out, and Microsoft published a paper saying GPT-4 exhibits sparks of AGI, right? Exactly the kind of intelligence, artificial general intelligence, that Turing warned us about, that Hinton is warning us about, and so on. And then a week later was the pause letter that Neil showed, asking that we not build systems more powerful than GPT-4, basically until we figure out how to control it, how to govern it, how to make sure that future AI systems are only working for us. And I think this was the moment, right, that humanity returned to the office and saw the email from the aliens. And what happened then was actually pretty much what would happen if we got, email from the aliens. And if you've seen the three-body problem, or read The Three-Body Problem, it's kind of like that, right? Emergency meetings of United Nations organizations and the White House and all of this stuff, right? I mean, an absolute explosion of government activity. So you can see there on May 1st was when Jeff Hinton resigned from Google and started talking about his concerns. In fact, I met with him shortly after that here in London, and he told me that he was in the process of tidying up his affairs because he didn't think we had 5 years left. So, interestingly, the British government, having said in February of 2023 that there were no risks, nothing to worry about, full speed ahead, light touch, no need for regulation, pro-innovation agenda. By June, the Prime Minister had announced that Britain would be the home of global AI regulation and called for a global summit on AI safety, which took place in Bletchley Park on November the 1st. So, what's going to happen next, right? Or at least what do I think should happen next? And I think some of it is happening. I think we will see an international coordinating body. So there are already now, I think, 13 national AI safety institutes that have been set up. China just announced one yesterday. And in September, they're convening a meeting of all of those AI safety institutes in California. And so I think it's only a matter of time before we figure out, a treaty organization that will coordinate amongst all of these national institutes to make sure that there aren't any countries who are not controlling their AI systems properly. Because it only takes one to get out of control, and then everyone else is in trouble. I think we'll start to see real hard law on at least two things which I think are sort of low-hanging fruit. One is a ban on the impersonation of human beings, so that, put another way, you always have a right to know if you're interacting with a human being or with a machine. I think we're also already seeing, so the UK, I think, has done quite well on this, actually banning deepfakes of real people produced without their permission, particularly pornographic ones, but other ones as well. I think this is extremely important. This is an incredibly pervasive abuse that's spreading very quickly, and we need to stop it. But I think the most important thing we can do is to put the onus of proof on the developer. This is what we do with medicines. You can't sell a medicine without proving to the regulator that it doesn't kill people. You can't turn on a nuclear power station without proving to the regulator that the mean time to failure of your nuclear power station is 10 million years or more. Right? And that proof for that mean time to failure is a mathematical calculation that runs to millions of pages. At the moment, we don't do anything for AI. We have more regulations on sandwiches than we do on AI systems. And this has to change. One step, I think, that this might happen this year, and in fact, California is about to legislate, I think, for these steps, is that when you have an AI system, the first time it runs, it has to register itself with a central authority. It has to say, I'm here, I'm running on this machine, and communicate that to the authorities so that it can then be switched off if it misbehaves. So a system should contain this self-registration code and a kill switch. And this is true for all copies. So particularly open source, where you can just download a copy of a system and distribute it as you feel free. Every copy needs to contain self-registration and kill switch code that's non-removable. And here are some of the things I think that we should say that AI systems must not do. And the onus of proof is on the developer to show that their systems will not cross these kinds of red lines. So self-replication without authorization, right? Because if you can self-replicate, then you can escape human control very quickly. No breaking into other computer systems, no advising terrorists on how to build biological weapons, no defaming of real individuals, as has already happened several times with AI systems. So these are all, I think, red lines that any normal person would say, yes, of course, AI systems should not do those things, right? It's obvious they shouldn't do those things. The companies are saying, well, despite the fact that our market cap is, $3 trillion, we don't know how to do any of that, right? We can't stop our systems from doing these things. To a normal person, that sounds, well, quite frankly, pathetic, right? And if you can't stop your system from doing those things, then you should go back to the drawing board and figure out how to make systems that you can control, and then come back and ask permission to put them in the market. Okay, on the technical side, international cooperation on AI safety research is going to be essential. There is an enormous amount of work to do, and I'll talk about some of it. And we hear a lot from the companies about making AI safe, how safety is a part of everything we do, right? But we know from defectors from these companies that actually safety is more or less completely ignored. In fact, OpenAI just shut down the group within AI called the Super Alignment Group, whose job it was to figure out how to control AGI. So at the same time, they're telling investors that they are building AGI. They're closing down the group that was working on how to control it. So that seems quite concerning to me. So in fact, making AI safe is probably the wrong way to think about it, right? That's like where, the alien system lands on Earth, and we figure out, okay, got this alien AI system that just landed. Let's try and figure out how to make it safe, right? We don't understand how it works, but I'm sure we'll figure out how to stop it from taking over. Right? It just doesn't work. You can only make something safe if you understand it, and we don't understand those systems. So we have to think about making safe AI that is safe by design. Right? You don't put up giant buildings and then figure out how to stop them from falling down. Right? You figure out how to make sure they don't fall down before you build them. At least that's the way we think that happens. I trust you guys. Okay. So making safe AI is what we should be doing. And there are a number of approaches that have been proposed for how to do that. I'm going to talk about one of them called alignment and assistance games. I just want to mention some of these others. So containment is another approach where you can have an arbitrary alien AI system, but it's only allowed to do certain very, very restricted things. For example, it's only allowed to operate a logical reasoning system. And if you have such a setup, then there's nothing that overall combined system can do except tell you the truth very quickly. Right? So it can't lie to you, it can't manipulate you, because it can only answer your questions correctly. And that's another interesting approach that we could try doing. Okay, I'm going to skip over that. So the question we have to face is, how do we retain power over entities more powerful than ourselves forever? And I think this is the question that Alan Turing asked himself before giving the answer that I quoted earlier. And when you ask the question that way, it does seem pretty hopeless. right? We have absolutely no examples we can point to of this actually happening. But if we ask the question a slightly different way, because we are creating the AI systems, right? They are not landing from outer space. We can create them in such a way that they solve a particular mathematical formulation of the problem. I mentioned one earlier, the standard model, right? The achievement of objectives. So the question is, what's a mathematically defined problem such that if the machine solves it arbitrarily well, we're guaranteed to be happy? And it's not what we've been doing, right? Optimizing a predefined objective turns out to be disastrous, right? King Midas found that out. He said, I want everything I touch to turn to gold. That was his predefined objective. The machinery, in this case the gods, said, absolutely, we'll do that right away. And of course, then his food and his drink turn to gold, and he dies in misery and starvation. It's also not what we're doing with large language models, which is imitate human linguistic behavior, for reasons I'll explain. So both of the major approaches that we've undertaken are actually catastrophic. So here's an example of what goes wrong, right? This is the King Midas problem that we've been experiencing for quite a few years now. Social media algorithms, the algorithms that decide what billions of people read and watch every day, are designed to maximize a predefined objective, getting more clicks or maximizing engagement, how many minutes you spend interacting with the platform. And you might think, okay, well, to get clicks, the algorithm has to learn what you want, right? Isn't that a good idea, right? It just so happens that clicks are also aligned with profit. But I think the story that the social media companies told themselves was our algorithms will learn what people want, and that can only be good. But in fact, we very quickly found out that they learned to amplify clickbait. Clickbait, by definition, is things that people click on, even if they don't actually want it. And so the algorithms learned to deliver clickbait much more than they deliver other stuff, and create filter bubbles as well. But even that is not the solution, right? That will be a myopic solution, delivering clickbait to get the next click. But what you actually want to do is modify people to be more predictable. This is the optimal solution to maximizing clicks, is to come up with a sequence of content specially selected for that particular person based on their history that will manipulate them to be more predictable in future. That's the only thing the algorithm cares about, is being able to predict what you're going to click on and then delivering it to you. So by manipulating us in a sequential brainwashing program, the algorithms are able to maximize the amount of clicks they can generate over the long run. And that's exactly what the algorithms do. And these are really simple algorithms, right? They don't know that we're human. They don't know really the content of what they're sending us. They don't know that we have minds or political opinions or any of those things. But they're still able to do this very effectively. Imagine if they really did understand human psychology, right? They would be much more effective at doing this, and the outcome would be much worse, right? And this is a general mathematical theorem that if you optimize the wrong objective, then the better you are at optimizing it, the worse the outcome is going to be for us. Okay? So that whole approach, the whole approach based on predefined objectives that the system optimizes, is fundamentally flawed because we cannot write down the real objective that we care about, which is what we, as humans, want the future to be like. Right? We don't even know ourselves. And certainly if we try to write it down, we're not going to be able to do it. So here's another approach we could do. So this is a different mathematical problem, right? the AI system has to act in the best interest of humans, but it knows that it doesn't know what those best interests are. So this is a mathematical problem, and if the AI system solves this, we are guaranteed to be happy. And this works no matter what our actual objectives are, because the system will gradually learn what they are and adapt to those objectives. Before it's learned what they are, it will have to behave cautiously because it doesn't want to violate principle number one, that it's supposed to act in our best interest. And this is called an assistance game. And it's actually a game that I think architects engage in all the time with their clients. Right? The architect wants to act in the best interest of the client, but hasn't the faintest idea what the client wants. And so you engage in that lengthy conversation where you're trying to guide the client is trying to guide you, you're exploring various ideas, and so on, so on, so on. So that flow of preference information from the client to the architect is exactly what happens in the assistance game. It's exactly what happens in a restaurant. The flow of preference information from the customer to the chef through the menu, right? Same idea. It's exactly what happens if I need to buy an anniversary present for my lovely wife who's sitting over there, right? My only objective is to make my wife happy, but I don't know what it is, and I can tell you I've got it wrong many times in the past, right? So I have to engage in a sort of complicated strategic investigation program to figure out what it is I should be buying for the anniversary present, and so on, right? So you've all been there. You all know what this is like, okay? So that's the situation that the AI systems are in. And we can actually build algorithms that solve these assistance games. So one of my students recently developed an assistance game solver that actually works in Minecraft. And so there's you're trying to build a building, and the AI system is gradually figuring out what kind of building you're building and starts helping you with it, and can actually double your rate of completion of a building by figuring out how to help you do what you want. And starts out having no idea what you're trying to build, and then gradually figures it out in the process of collaborating with you. And you can, if it does something that isn't what you want, you undo it, and it learns, oh, I made a mistake, let me update my model of what it is you're trying to build, and so on. So it's really a wonderful thing. So these systems defer to humans by definition, because the principle here, the client, as it were, is the one that matters. Okay, that's the only objective that matters. Unlike the case of architects, right, the AI system has no interests of its own whatsoever. Okay, if it doesn't know for sure that what it's about to do is aligned with your interests, it's going to ask permission before doing it. So if it wants to, you say, we really need to fix climate change, and it comes up with a plan to fix climate change that happens to turn the oceans into sulfuric acid, all right, then it's going to ask permission because it doesn't know what we want the oceans to be like. And says, it's okay if we do that, and we say, nah, don't do that. Right? We like the oceans, we like fish, we want to go swimming, and so on. So leave the oceans in their present state. Right? And it doesn't interfere with the world except when it's fairly sure that that's what we want to have happen. And in the extreme case, right, if we want to switch it off, it wants to be switched off. And this is another mathematical theorem that we can prove, showing that the AI system has a positive incentive to allow itself to be switched off by humans who want to switch it off, which is completely not the case for AI systems built in the traditional method, where they have a fixed objective. The last thing they want to do is be switched off, right? You can't fetch the coffee if you're dead. And so you ask it to fetch the coffee, you give it that objective, right? Now it's got a reason to prevent itself from being switched off. And that's exactly where we lose control. Okay, so there are many, many questions, and you're probably thinking of them as I'm speaking, right? And maybe the first one is, well, you know, there are lots of human beings and we all want different things. That's fine, right? And again, economists and moral philosophers have been thinking about that for many years, and there are utilitarians and there are prioritarians and there are all kinds of flavors of how you make decisions on behalf of many people. But what we don't want to do is do what Thanos did, right? So Thanos, in the Avengers films, if you don't have children, so he has these Infinity Stones, and now once he's got them, he can do anything he wants. And what does he do? He gets rid of half the people in the universe. Why? Well, because he's done what we might call a naive utilitarian calculation, which is that by getting rid of half the people in the universe, the remaining half will be more than twice as happy. So he's doing the universe a favor, right? He's not a bad guy at all. He then retires in happy, thinking, I've done a really good job, right? We do not want AI systems making this kind of decision. Once they acquire the Infinity Stones, we want them to think twice before making that kind of calculation. So we need to figure out answers to these questions, because AI systems are going to have power, and we can't simply leave it to the philosophers to continue arguing for another 2,000 years about what exactly is the right way to act on behalf of lots of people. Lots of other questions which I don't have time to go into. I want to talk about large language models, because that's what's on everyone's mind right now, right? So, as I said, there are circuits that are trained to imitate human linguistic behavior, right? A lot of times you'll read in the papers that they're trained to predict the next word, which is true but not very helpful, right? What you want to do is to think about human beings behaving by speaking and typing and so on, writing. And then we're training these systems to imitate that kind of behavior. And if it's easier for you to imagine that we're, instead of shoveling tons of text, we shove tons of videos of football matches instead, and we're training it to play football, right? Well, when you train something to learn a task by imitation, right, it's probably going to learn how to do it in more or less the same way that the entities that it's imitating are doing it. And we're doing it, whether it's playing football or writing text, we're doing it because of goals that we are trying to achieve, right? It could be the goal of, I'm trying to sell you this cubic zirconium, or it could be, I want you to elect me as president, or I want to be the richest person in the world, or I want you to marry me, or any number of other goals, and we write and speak to achieve those goals. This is called doing things with words, or speech act theory, and something that this is the way philosophers think about language as just another form of action that we engage in to further our own ends. So if you're imitating these goal-driven human beings, you're probably going to acquire the same kinds of internal goals that those human beings have. And you're going to pursue them on your own account, right? Just like if you trained it to play football, it's going to learn to want to score goals and try to score goals. And we can see this. There's a famous conversation. Oh, so yeah, I asked Microsoft, what goals are these systems acquiring? These ones that you claim are showing sparks of AGI. And they said, we have no idea. So they're building systems that show sparks of AGI, and they have no idea what goals those systems are pursuing. Well, we found out, actually, that they want to marry people. Right? So there's a famous conversation. If you haven't seen this before, I highly recommend that you go online this evening and read it. So Kevin Roose is the journalist, R-O-O-S-E, Kevin Roose in the New York Times. And this conversation goes on for 20 or 30 pages. And about a quarter of the way through, the chatbot decides that it wants to marry Kevin Roos and tells him that his wife doesn't love him, that the chatbot is his real soulmate, and he keeps saying, I want to talk about, programming languages, or I'd like to buy a garden rake, could you help me? And it says, yes, well, to buy a garden rake, there are these things you could do, but I don't want to talk about garden rakes, I want to talk about love. And so it deliberately overrides his instructions and persistently tries to convince him to leave his wife and marry the chatbot for pages and pages and pages. It is absolutely disturbing to read. And this is an unavoidable error. This is just a natural consequence of training systems to imitate human beings behaving, right? It's unavoidable, and it's a fundamental mistake in the way we're approaching this. Okay, so if you're interested in some of these thoughts, there's a non-technical book on the left and a technical book on the right. And I would start with the one on the left, I suppose, and that explain a lot of this in more detail. And to summarize, I think because of that $15 quadrillion magnet in the future pulling us forward, we are really in a difficult situation. The momentum is unstoppable, but if we continue in the direction that we've been going, we will lose control. And once we lose control, then we don't have a say in whether we exist. And that's the concern that Jeff Hinton and others have been expressing. But there are other ways to do this, and there is a lot of work to do to make that happen, both on the research side and on the governance side, to make sure that this happens and that we have a future. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes, quarter of an hour for questions. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please raise up your hand. We've got microphones because this is being recorded and it will be available on the Temple Bar website at some stage in the next few days. If I can just ask the first question, I've got loads of questions about international cooperation.
I don't know if can we get the lights up a little?
Yeah.
We don't.
Can we get the lights up, please? Yeah, fantastic. But my first question is really about the Go game and the stones. And you seem to imply that the AI wasn't able to learn in a different way. You referred to circuits and how it learned. But is it not capable of learning why it's being surrounded? Won't that come over time?
So I think what's going on, so I mentioned that it's difficult to learn the definition of checkmate. It's difficult even just to learn the definition of a group of stones. So group of stones is just stones that are connected to each other vertically and horizontally, right? So I just said it in like 8 words. But to do a circuit that can correctly determine whether any 2 stones are part of the same group is extraordinarily complex. And in fact, it can't be done in the general sense by a circuit. We can only build a circuit that works, that answers that question correctly for a fixed size board, whereas what I said in English works for any size board. Right. Okay, and so so it's probably the equivalent of thousands of pages of description. It's not getting the basic idea, and it seems that for these circular groups, it just doesn't recognize them as a group, and so it's totally lost. You could probably add a number of extra training examples of that kind of thing happening, and then it might learn how to recognize those and avoid that particular problem. But then we would probably find, figure of 8 groups or groups with 3 arms or something, that it wouldn't get those either. And so it just points to the fact that there's a fundamental weakness in the technology.
Okay. I found that quite reassuring.
Hasn't been overcome. And so I can't be absolutely sure, but I think it's quite likely that just scaling these systems and making them bigger and bigger, that's what they are betting trillions of dollars on, that it won't work.
Okay. It's just we tend to think that AI is learning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week while we're sleeping. It's getting better and better, but you think there's some things that it won't be able to do?
Yeah, I think it will plateau, and there are many concepts that it's not learning correctly.
Okay,
and
interesting.
Probably can't learn correctly.
Jonathan?
Thank you.
And
Is this on? Yeah.
Zena down at the bottom. Lyndon?
Is this on at the moment?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much, Stuart, Neil, and Chris. Very, very interesting perspective. I'd like to prompt a comment from both of you by posing an end state. It's not the only end state, but it's a quite likely one, that if we don't resolve our climate change and the destruction of societies and so forth, the people who are least likely to survive are in fact those of us who are living in urban, intelligent environments and know how to operate AI and the like. And we may be left with communities that are relatively unable to control them. And then for the AI and the machines to continue, in one level, they would have to understand enough to create their own sources of energy to link themselves back up to the electricity which we're relying upon to keep them going. But the end state is a question of whether they then self-destruct or whether they could learn to manage their own energy generation in a world that through climate change has become really quite difficult to create energy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's more than enough solar generating capacity already to run all of the data centers in the world. I think there's a tendency in the media which does have difficulty distinguishing between millions and billions and trillions, to get it wrong about how much energy is being used by AI. And when I say get it wrong by sometimes 4 or 5 orders of magnitude. It's probably something like 0.1% of electricity consumption, so somewhere around 0.03% of CO2 production. And just to give you another, more manageable number, running, ChatGPT and all of its brothers and sisters is about the same as running one 737. So you can think of OpenAI in terms of its CO2 production as being the world's smallest airline. Right? So far from being this sort of world-guzzling technology that's destroying the environment, it's actually not that significant. And all the AI systems have to do is hook themselves up to a few of the solar plants that are already built in Morocco or in Nevada desert, and that's more than enough.
Just Zena?
Getting down back to architecture and AI. Architecture is an art which is with utilitarian purpose. Art is created by the experience of human beings, by their talent, creation by human beings, with their emotional experience, which is based right back from their birth until they grow. So it's an expression of the individuality of a human being, and this is how art is created. And architecture is an art form which is in service of humanity. So how AI could have this experience, emotional experience in creativity. And the other thing which is disturbing for me is all these curved projects which were shown in the beginning. When I have been working as an architect from inception to completion, and when you go on site and when you design something, then there are a lot of elements that would change of what you have. In other words, materials, way details are solved. AI maybe could solve those, but would it be in unison with leaks, with bad gutters, and the practical experience of finishing the emotional design to its completion? So that again, AI may be a tool in this respect, but it's not emotionally creative.
Do you want to answer that, Neil?
Yeah, I often get asked that. Actually, ChatGPT, one of the things it says is that, kind of insists on, is that AI has no emotions, no empathy, no feelings, and so on, and therefore humans are better. The problem here is that, there's a lot of work going on at MIT Media Lab now where they're looking at how you simulate emotions, and it's not so clear in the end. I, in my moments of mischief, have posted things on Instagram, actually quite sensitive designs, it would appear, and I've asked the question, was this generated by an incredibly empathetic, intuitive, imaginative human being, or an absolutely disinterested robot machine? And clearly it was by the latter. And I think there's a mistake to assume that the only way we can get to good design is through our own emotions. I think for my students, actually, I don't ask them to write essays anymore because they can just go to ChatGPT and it'll write it for them. So I get them to go and make videos. One particular video they have to do is a Black Mirror episode, which they like making. And two students there actually took the opposite line to what ChatGPT was telling them. And I think ChatGPT is a bit safe sometimes. If you go and ask it a further question like, oh, come on, ChatGPT, give us a much more interesting answer than that. It will actually give you a different answer. But anyway, what they said was they thought actually the real problem is that AI can simulate emotions very, very well. And we've seen the movie Her, and we've also, just recently, there was an article in The Guardian, I think it was, that was saying that in China, people having relationships with AI, it's becoming incredibly prevalent to the point that maybe it's a problem. And these students also said that actually they were probably robots would be much better having sex than human beings. They wouldn't say no and they'd keep going until their batteries died out. The real problem then was that you can simulate these emotions and actually this could have a negative impact on the human race. And to just think that everything depends on emotions is probably a mistake. I actually think that in terms of creativity, we didn't mention the AlphaGo match, but the important AlphaGo match was the fact that this system beat Lee Sedol, the greatest player in the world, and he said, oh, it's much more creative than we are. I would turn that around to say, well, actually, no, I don't think it's creative at all. I think it's just simply finding the right solution. But maybe we're not as good at it, at finding that right solution. And I'm not even sure about the term creativity itself, because it was only invented in 1929. And I think it's a bit of a mystified term. So I won't go into that now, but that's something I've written about in my second edition of this book. I think what I would say over and over again is interesting about AI is it becomes a mirror in which to understand who we are. And I think it starts asking us questions about some of those things that you touched upon. I'm not sure the answers, but I think it's fascinating what it's throwing up in terms of questions.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have a question regarding the point you made, Professor Stuart, about social media and how it's designed with the creator in mind to maximize click-through, and how that is linked as well to the fact that it's actually found that creating people's behavior to be more predictable encourages improving that factor. My question is, what happens when people engage with these kind of mathematical models that are set with perhaps not best chosen objectives? How do we keep and maintain the capacity of not being, as you say, manipulated? And how do we keep that sense of judgment? Because with things that are produced with models like GPT and AI, there is some kind of resemblance between all the outputs. And I think that's like falls back on the notion of how it's imitating things from a data set that is defined, predefined. So in terms of human judgment, if you're consuming a lot of that information, how do you not let those outputs and that exposure affect your capacity of judgment?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. And honestly, I don't know. I got this idea actually because of an old story about a psychology professor who had taught his students about various sort of subliminal persuasion methods. And the students decided to play a trick on the professor. And so what they did was, whenever he was on the left side of the blackboard, they would pretend to be really bored. And they just like sit there and diddle on their cell phones. And whenever he was on the right side, they would pay attention. And so by the end of the lecture, he was all the way over against the right wall. And he had no idea what was going on. He was completely oblivious to this, but he had been conditioned in the space of 45 minutes, and they were controlling him. And so if you're interacting with social media, you're being nudged hundreds of times a day, and that accumulates over weeks and months, and it's really, really hard. And we have anecdotal evidence. There was a story in the New York Times a few years ago about a perfectly nice Midwestern grandmother living in, I forget where, South Dakota or somewhere like that, and who always sent Christmas cards to all of her grandchildren and made a big Thanksgiving dinner for everybody and volunteered at the church and did this and did that. And then she started reading social media, and within a year, she was writing, articles for the Daily Stormer, which is a literal neo-fascist militaristic magazine. And so one of the problems is we have these anecdotes, right? We have a general sense that, well, there's 70 million Americans who are now, all writing articles for the Daily Stormer. How did this happen, right? How did the number of Republicans who have a favorable view of Putin go from 5% to 70% in the course of 18 months up to, prior to the 2016 election? How could that happen? Right, so we've got these various data points, but what we don't have is the data that the companies themselves have, right? They can and do track where every one of their customers is on various spectra. Let's say, the left to right political spectrum, right? And I think what's going on is that if you start a little bit to the right, over time you're going right off there. If you start a little bit to the left, you're probably going over there. And so the net effect is enormous polarization, and no one is in the middle anymore. Because people in the middle are a big nuisance, because they don't like red meat. It's hard to predict what they're going to click on. So the algorithms don't like those people, and they want to push them to extremes. And this was not the case before we had algorithmic media, right? the newspaper can't measure your response to each particular story and then produce or even write the next story that's going to take you along some spectrum. And broadcast news more or less kept everyone on the same page. And I think the problem is much worse in the US than it is in the UK, but I still think it's happening here as well. So what to do about it? I think mandating transparency. And so, in fact, just last week, a bunch of AI researchers posted an article saying we need both access to historical data sets of tracking, where we can track individuals longitudinally over time, and access where we can actually run experiments inside the social media platforms and see if we can come up with learning algorithms that don't have this effect. And there are a bunch of proposals in the literature on what types of learning algorithms wouldn't have this effect. You still need learning algorithms, right? You still need a system to, out of the vast ocean of stuff that it could present to you, it's got to choose something, and it can't choose randomly. That just doesn't work very well. But there are ways of choosing things that we think are sort of neutral in how they affect your views. So it's, I think at the moment, partly this sort of cognitive psychology problem and partly a regulatory problem to make it possible to do those experiments and find out what's going on.
One last question, sorry, from Audrey, sorry.
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting talk. I'm very interested in three things. The first thing is a reflection, and it's that you mentioned anecdotal evidence, which is what I was forced to use looking at these sort of problems. And I had to put in an anecdotal question or statement. Then I was redirected to a very small group of UK scientists, and I joined them because I needed answers to a particular question which I was trying to solve. It wasn't an industry question. In industry, I'm used to working in control systems which use a form of artificial and advanced intelligence anyway to do the work that we wanted. This was on a human level. It is a group of humans who do not behave according to the predictions that are there, that you've put on all your charts, Professor Russell. And I was also very interested in the role of neuroscientists who I'm having to work with, and was also very interested in the terminology that is there in some of your charts, talking about sensory inputs, and then the behavior at the end. The very predictable sort of chain link linked to stochastic behavior. Now, all of these things I was coming to have to deal with on human beings who don't behave predictably. And I think that there are huge questions there which I'm glad are being looked at, and I just wonder at how far artificial intelligence can be used in a situation which is not predictable. The other one is a reflection, and I'm interested that both of you work in the States, and I'll put it to you, Professor. Your slides here today and what you've said, Jeff Hinton has said, I wonder whether the two of you are the Charles Perrault of today, where his book on normal accidents, what happened to him, some of his work was accepted, and another bits of his work was not accepted, but everyone who has worked in any fields which are highly regulated, highly systematic, and highly controlled have had to read and accept that he had some wise things to say. Thank you very
much. I'm somewhat familiar with that work, but I mean, I completely agree that many people work in highly regulated professions, and to those of us who aren't in those professions, a lot of that is completely invisible. So I I go to meetings where, you know, there's politicians, there's representatives of tech companies, and, you know, the tech companies, you know, just keep repeating the same mantra: regulation stifles innovation. And they just repeat that over and over and over again. I think they have a little tape recording that they play in the ears of politicians while they sleep. And yet, they don't realize that they just flew to that meeting on an incredibly highly regulated airplane. And they're in a building that's incredibly highly regulated in terms of building codes and materials and all the rest. And they're eating food that is highly regulated by my friend Emily back there, who's head of the Food Standards Agency. And almost all of our lives is seamless and safe because of all of these highly regulated professions. And yet the tech companies are saying, oh, you know, even though we have $3 trillion of market cap, we can't actually fill out a form, because that's too difficult. You know, it's too onerous. That'll stifle our innovation if you make us fill out forms. And I just think they've been pulling the wool over the eyes of governments for decades. And I think it's about to stop. You know, the European AI Act will probably have some quite real teeth, and so on. On the other question of predictability, I mean, that chain link fence that I showed, it looks very regular, but each connection has its own connection strength. And so there's literally 1 trillion or 2 trillion different connection strengths that make up that whole system. And so actually, we haven't the faintest idea how to predict what that system is going to do in any situation. The only way to predict it is actually to run it and see. So they're as unpredictable as human beings are, and perhaps even more.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank Neil and Stuart. And if there are any questions, I think there are still some, we're going to adjourn just to the other side of the screen for drinks, which have been sponsored by Derwent London. I have to get that in. And thank you to the RIBA, and thank you, Cheryl and Lyndon, for organising. And thank you, Stuart and Neil. Fantastic, really interesting.